The bell above the door of Ruby's diner jingled as the rain poured outside. Most nights were ordinary, coffee refills, slices of pie, and tired travelers, but this night was different. A lone biker, drenched from the storm, stepped inside with a quiet nod. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights cut through the windows, and the heavy boots of officers stomped in after him. What happened next was truly unbelievable. I subscribe to the channel to watch the full story, and don't forget to share in the comments what lesson you learned from it. Ruby, the middle-aged waitress who had spent 2 decades serving the same counter, noticed the tension instantly. The biker, covered in tattoos, looked intimidating to many, but his eyes held exhaustion, not malice. He sat silently, clutching a cup of coffee, as if it were the only warmth in the world. The officers accused him loudly, calling him a troublemaker, demanding he stand even before explaining why. Customers froze, whispering. To everyone, he looked guilty already. But Ruby didn't see a criminal. She saw a human being being cornered. Her voice cut through the tension. "He hasn't done anything. You can't treat him like this in my diner." The room gasped. A waitress standing up to the police? The officers frowned, warning her to stay out of it. But Ruby stood her ground, shielding the biker like a mother hen. Her diner had always been a place of fairness, and she wouldn't let it become a place of humiliation. The officers, frustrated, left with threats hanging in the air. The next morning, Ruby's diner woke up to the same clinking of plates and smell of bacon. Yet Ruby's hands trembled as she poured coffee, haunted by the memory of the officer's cold eyes the night before. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just placed herself in the middle of a storm she could never handle? Every time the bell above the door rang, she braced herself, half expecting the police to walk back in and shut her down for defiance. Customers came and went, whispering about the waitress who dared to challenge authority, some calling her brave, others calling her reckless. By afternoon, the diner had settled into its familiar rhythm, but Ruby's heart refused to find peace, each sound from the street pulling her gaze nervously to the window. And then it happened, a low rumble, faint at first, like distant thunder rolling across the hills. The sound grew heavier, deeper, until the very glass panes of the diner trembled in their frames. Forks dropped, cups rattled, and heads turned as the noise transformed into a symphony of roaring motorcycle engines. Ruby stepped outside, her breath catching in her throat as she froze at the sight before her. From one end of the road to the other, motorcycles stretched in a line so long it seemed endless, chrome glinting like a river of steel under the morning sun. There weren't 10 or 20, there were hundreds. Each rider clad in leather, helmets shining, boots planted firmly as engines revved in unison. Her small town had never seen such a sight, and whispers of fear rippled through the gathering crowd of onlookers who had rushed to the street. The bikers parked one by one, forming a fortress-like wall around the diner, until the roar finally fell into silence, leaving only the faint ticking of cooling engines. Ruby's knees weakened and she gripped the doorframe, uncertain whether this was a warning or a blessing. The air grew thick with suspense as one rider dismounted, removing his helmet to reveal the tired, familiar face of the man she had defended. His eyes weren't cold or hard. They glistened with something softer, something Ruby hadn't expected: gratitude. He walked slowly toward her, each boot step echoing against the stunned silence of the street, until he stopped just a breath away from her. The biker looked her straight in the eye, and in a steady voice that carried like a vow, he said, "You stood up for me when I was alone." Ruby swallowed hard, the world blurring for a moment, her lips parting as she struggled to find a reply. The man turned, lifting his arm, and in one sweeping motion, the crowd of riders raised their fists to the sky in unison. The sound of 200 engines roared back to life, not as a threat, but as a chorus of loyalty, echoing like a promise across the streets. The biker turned back to her, his words steady. "Now you will never stand alone. Not while we ride." A tear slipped down Ruby's cheek as she realized this wasn't revenge or intimidation. It was protection. It was solidarity. It was brotherhood. And in that charged silence, Ruby understood. By shielding one man the night before, She had earned the respect of an entire army. The engines slowly quieted one after another, until the town lay in a silence so thick it carried the weight of every unspoken thought. Ruby stood there, her apron still dusted with flour, her hands trembling, caught between disbelief and awe at the sea of riders surrounding her diner. Never in her life had she seen such power gathered in one place, yet never had she felt safer than in that moment. The biker she had defended placed his helmet under his arm and spoke with a voice that carried both authority and humility. "You didn't see a criminal when everyone else did. You saw a man. For that, you have the respect of all of us." His words pierced through Ruby's heart like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and suddenly the tears she had been holding back spilled freely. Inside the diner, customers pressed against the windows. Their jaws dropped, realizing that this waitress, quiet, ordinary Ruby, had become the center of something extraordinary. The bikers, often branded as outlaws by society, now looked not like villains but guardians, each one standing tall in silent tribute to the woman who had dared to defend dignity. Ruby's voice cracked as she whispered, "I only did what was right." The man smiled gently, shaking his head. "That's what makes it rare." With that, he turned to the riders, and in one breathtaking moment, 200 men and women bowed their heads in respect. The crowd that had gathered on the sidewalks gasped, some covering their mouths, others wiping their eyes, realizing they were witnessing a moment of history in their small town. Ruby's Diner, once just a roadside stop for coffee and pie, had become a symbol, a sanctuary, where courage and kindness reigned, above fear and prejudice. As the bikers began to step inside, laughter soon replaced the silence. The sound of boots on the old wooden floor, mixing with the clink of plates and spoons. They filled every booth, every stool at the counter, ordering meals not out of hunger alone but as a gesture of loyalty to the woman who had defended one of their own. Children peeked in through the windows, their eyes wide with wonder, as though they were watching heroes gather around a queen's table. Ruby moved from table to table, her hands still shaking, pouring coffee and serving food, though each plate felt like a gift, returned tenfold. For years, she had been the invisible soul of the diner, just a waitress, just another face. But in the eyes of these riders, she was something far greater. She was proof that one voice, however small, can stand against injustice and ignite a flame of unity. The whispers of fear in town slowly turned to whispers of admiration, as neighbors began to see the riders differently, no longer as shadows on the road, but as brothers and sisters bound by loyalty. And at the center of it all stood Ruby, her heart swelling with a pride she had never known. The man she had defended raised his glass of soda and said, "To Ruby, the bravest soul on this road." A cheer erupted so loud it shook the very walls. But it was not the sound of chaos, it was the sound of gratitude, of a bond forged stronger than steel. Ruby smiled through her tears, realizing she had not just changed one man's fate, but had unknowingly shifted how an entire community was seen. What began as a single act of defiance had grown into a movement of brotherhood, of compassion, of unbreakable respect. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with gold, Ruby understood a truth she would never forget. Sometimes the smallest stand, made in the quiet of an ordinary life, echoes loud enough to be heard by hundreds. And sometimes defending just one's soul means gaining the loyalty of an army. From that day forward, Ruby's Diner was not just a place to eat, it was a monument to courage, a reminder that kindness can roar louder than any engine. And in the hearts of those 200 riders, Ruby's name was written in fire, carried with them wherever the road stretched forever.